Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did an interview with Laura Trump, actually, and he was asked about President Obama's comments, both about Attorney General Barr dropping charges against General Flynn and Obama's pronouncements in terms of reviewing the quality of the Trump administration's response to the pandemic. In his estimation, McConnell had this to say about the former president's comments.
You know, generally former presidents just don't do that. I remember President George W. Bush and his father went right through 8 years of Democratic administrations after they left office and kept their mouths shut because they didn't feel it was appropriate for former presidents to be to critique even a president of another party. So I think President Obama should have kept his mouth shut. You know, we know he doesn't like much this administration is doing. That's understandable. But I think it's a little bit classless, frankly, to critique an administration that comes after you. You had your shot. You were there for 8 years. I think the tradition that the Bushes set up of not critiquing the president who comes after you is a good tradition.
Always a man of norms.
Yes.
In political norms. But Trey Gowdy, also want to hear from him. He was on with Tucker Carlson last night, and he admitted to a mistake he made. Early on in the process.
You were briefed by the FBI in 2018, and shortly after that briefing came on this channel to describe your reaction to it. Here's what you said then.
But as of now, I think Chris Wray and Rod Rosenstein are stunned whenever people think Trump is the target of their investigation. I'll leave it up to them how to brief the president or how to brief his lawyers.
Was that point of view that you're talking about right now, was that strengthened when you went into this briefing last week?
Yes, I am even more convinced that the FBI did exactly what my fellow citizens would want them to do when they got the information they got, and that it has nothing to do with Donald Trump.
I remember watching that and thinking, boy, I hope he's right. Do you still feel that way?
Oh, gosh, no. That was I made a lot of mistakes in life, relying on briefings and not insisting on the documents. It took me about 3 weeks. I went over to the Department of Justice. I sat there for 4 hours. That's when I saw that Peter Strzok actually initiated and approved Crossfire Hurricane. That's when I saw the exculpatory information on George Papadopoulos. That's when I saw for the very first time that it was the Trump campaign mentioned in that predicate document. They've been telling us all along, Trump's not the target, the campaign's not the target. So, yes, my mistake was relying on the word of the FBI and the DOJ and not insisting on the documents.
Right.
Luckily, it took me about 3 weeks to correct that mistake.
Yeah. That was a big mistake, a mistake nobody's ever going to make again because of the reputation of the FBI, particularly if you are center-right. I don't know, even under Christopher Wray, is so damaged by their performance during 2016, the election, and then the Mueller investigation, which arguably was largely orchestrated to protect the reputation of the FBI after it had so bungled things in 2016 under Jim Comey. A very good piece by Holman Jenkins in the Wall Street Journal. What the FBI cover-up is covering up. The Steele dossier was known to consist of silly inventions and scrappings from the internet, likely tainted by Kremlin disinformation. Right, not even Glenn Simpson at Fusion GPS, who paid for the dossier and was paid for the dossier, could verify it, much less anybody else. There is, and Jenkins goes on to talk about what remains hidden in a classified report by the Justice Department Inspector General concerns the alleged Russian intelligence that FBI Director Comey used to justify his unprecedented, improper, and insubordinate interventions in the Hillary Clinton email case. I cannot stress too much the dereliction of the press since the flurry of disclosures in May 2017 by the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN that Mr. Comey's doings were triggered by a Russian intercept that his FBI colleagues believed to be false and possibly a plant. The intelligence appeared to reveal named Democrats and Obama officials discussing a conspiracy to bury the Clinton investigation. Either Mr. Comey ignored this evidence and implicitly became party to the conspiracy's alleged goal of liberating Mrs. Clinton from her email travails, or he exploited fabricated Russian intelligence to facilitate the same end. Either way, whether they inadvertently helped elect Trump by his ham-handed intervention late in the 2016 election cycle to reopen per Anthony Weiner's laptop or not, it's hard to see, going back to Jenkins, it's hard to see Mr. Mueller's forceful pursuit of guilty pleas from General Flynn and others over trivial matters as anything but an attempt to weave a distracting patina of legitimacy around the FBI's election year actions. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend KT McFarland, former First Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump and author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, I think you may have some comments on the whole General Flynn matter.
Yeah, since I was General Flynn's deputy.
Yeah.
Dan and Amy, it's great to be with you again. The article that you've read, when I first read it, I sort of read it second time and third time. He's nailed it. I mean, but I think that Holman Jenkins probably didn't go far enough. Like, what were they trying to cover up? I think that the entire Obama administration had gotten very deep into spying on everybody, and that was the big cover-up. And they assumed that Hillary would come in, and therefore nobody would ever complain about it. But then when Trump came in, they knew they had to cover their tracks and cover up. So they targeted Flynn, and they targeted me, because they knew that Flynn would understand what they had done because he'd been former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he knew what intelligence was, how it was gathered. He would have seen in a nanosecond what they'd been up to.
And so, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, but they had to get rid of him because he would have blown the whistle on the whole thing, especially because we had already planned to do a wholesale reorganization of the intelligence community.
And so, are they still doing it? In other words, President Obama's leaked, quote unquote, phone call talking about his concern for the rule of law with respect to the dropping of charges against General Flynn. Do you see that as just preemptive damage control for what is yet to come?
Yes. I think that yes, I definitely think there's a whole lot more coming. I think Obama et al. Are running scared, and this is a preemptive damage control.
Well, KT, how did all of this affect your former boss's life? I mean, I know we know that he had to go through hell, but how is he doing? Because I'm sure you still speak with him.
Well, actually, Amy, our lawyers don't want us to talk to each other just because I may have to testify on his behalf at some point in the future. But we have tech.
Uh-oh. KT?
Uh-oh.
I've congratulated him that his horrible nightmare is now over. But here's the thing. They ruined, and willy-nilly, Flynn was collateral damage. I was collateral damage. As I write in my new book, the FBI was clearly targeting everybody right from the beginning, and they were making stuff up as they went along. And they wanted Flynn to plead guilty to a crime he didn't commit. They wanted me to plead guilty to a crime I didn't commit. They wanted all of us to say that President Trump had done things which he hadn't done. And it was an attempt at the very beginning to really derail the Trump election, the Trump administration. We were collateral damage. Trump was always the target.
I know we've discussed this, but we need to reset the table in these times. Provide some more context to what you just said, which is that they wanted you to admit to a crime you didn't commit, and they were trying to use you to level up to the president.
Well, they used the same tactics with General Flynn that they did with me. They show up at my door, unannounced, say they just want to ask a few questions about Russian interference in the U.S. election. And I'm such a stupid Girl Scout. I said, well, yeah, I want to find out what the Russians did, too. I want to make sure nobody does this in an American election again. And so I cooperated with them. And when I asked, do I need a lawyer? And they said, well, we can't tell you not to get a lawyer, but you really, you don't really need a lawyer. We're just trying to get a sense of what was going on in the Trump transition. and the Trump campaign. And then as things went on, longer and longer and longer, 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours later, several sessions later, it was pretty clear that they seized all of my documents, all of my records, which I turned into the government, again, like a good Girl Scout, like you're supposed to do when you leave government. So they had all my text messages, emails, phone logs, and then they had like the answer key, and they would quiz me on stuff. And I didn't have access to these things. They would show me what they felt like showing me, what they wanted to show me, a paragraph here taken out of context. And when I asked, well, can I have everything that you've got, or can you give me the unredacted version, or how about at least putting them in chronological order or letting me make a copy of them? Oh, no, that's not how this works. They were setting up perjury traps, which is they can say that when you misremember something, it's not just humanity and faulty memory, it's a lie. And you have to then prove yourself innocent. You have to prove that it's not a lie.
So ultimately, ultimately, what did they want you to plead guilty to?
They wanted me to plead guilty to perjury. That they claimed that when I misremembered a phone call that was actually on a Thursday night, which was really on a Thursday afternoon, that somehow I was deliberately lying to them. It was a series of things like that. I mean, and they never got terribly clear about what crime I was supposed to have committed. But they did make clear that they wanted me to say things about Trump, then President-elect Trump, and incoming National Security Advisor General Flynn, which I did not believe they ever said or were guilty of.
It's fascinating to read the transcripts from the court filings of what the James Clappers and Susan Rice's and Samantha Powers's and Andy McCabe said under oath as compared to their black helicopter conspiracy theories they were promoting on cable TV news for 3 years. But it's worse than that. It's worse than just them saying Trump is a Russian agent on TV while behind closed doors and under oath they're saying, well, I don't have any knowledge of Russian collusion. I don't have any evidence that he colluded with the Russians. It's worse than that. There's actually lying again. James Clapper, who's used to lying to people, lied about the metadata collection program, as we know. And he also lied about whether or not he briefed Obama on the Flynn Kislyak phone calls, on the phone calls between General Flynn and Russian Ambassador Kislyak. When he was asked in a July 2017 interview by Republican committee members, he said he hadn't briefed Obama on those calls. In earlier congressional testimony provided by former FBI Director Jim Comey, according to Comey's March 2017 account, he briefed Clapper on the Flynn Kislyak calls and then gave the former DNI copies of the transcripts. In the first week of January, said Comey, Clapper briefed the president and the vice president and then President Obama's senior team about what we had found. That's not like misremembering. That's saying something that didn't happen, that happened, then didn't happen one way or the other. And that is like a material event, something you would not misremember unless you were suffering under some sort of medical condition.
Yeah, and remember, Dan, that they would have all had access to the records. And something like, what topic did you brief the president on? That would be heavily documented in the internal documents, which they would have had access to in preparing for those interviews. So there's not misremembering or, gee, I'm not sure if we said it Tuesday or Wednesday. That's pretty deliberate as far as I'm concerned. And I think there's an awful lot more that's going to come out. There's more and more evidence of this, and it's coming out every day.
General Flynn's defense counsel, Sidney Powell, said on Maria Bartiromo's show over the weekend that this goes all the way to the top, meaning President Obama, that he knew what was happening if he wasn't directing it himself.
I think that's the big question is what did Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, what did she know and when did she know it? What did Vice President Biden know and when did he know it? And what did President Obama know and when did he know it? And what was their role in all of this? Because, in effect, take a step back. This was one political party, an outgoing administration, which doesn't like the incoming administration of the opposite party, in fact, despises them, and despises everything that they're planning to do and the reason the American people elected them, and they want to undo it. They're in effect trying to undo an American election. And then think of what they've done to the nation for 3 years. They were on television every day, and their acolytes and echo chamber in the press saying, yes, we know there's definitely collusion, there's this, there's that. And yet the documents are now coming out. They knew from the very beginning this was all a hoax. They made it up.
Well, do you think there'll ever be a time when the people who framed Flynn will be held accountable?
Normally I would say, Amy, that the normal Washington way to do this, things like this in scandals, is the boss, in this case Christopher Wray, says, well, we've gotten rid of the bad apples, we've changed a few laws, nobody will be held accountable. And that's exactly what Wray has done, I think, to his enormous discredit, that he's covered it up and let it kind of fester. I do think, though, that President Trump and the people around President Trump, and President Trump has told me personally on several occasions, we're going to find out what really happened and we're going to hold these people accountable. Okay. So, yes, I do think that this time it's not going to be enough to just have a couple of mid-level guys paraded out. I think it's going to go right as far as it goes and right to the top. And what will happen is, as people start realizing they're under the spotlight and they're going to be held accountable for crimes, then they're going to say their boss's name if their boss was the one who directed them to do it.
On January 17th of 2017, or January 16th, I think it was actually, of
Get
2017.
the date right, Dan, if you're being...
Yeah, I got to get that date right.
Get every date right.
President Obama pardoned General James E. Cartwright, a retired Marine Corps general and former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his discussions with reporters about Iran's nuclear program, saving him from a possible prison sentence. Pardoned James Cartwright, General Cartwright, for lying to the FBI, pled guilty. Mm-hmm. I just note that because of the hand-wringing going on by Obama and those Obama cultists who are very concerned about the rule of law with the dropping of charges against General Flynn. He couldn't think of a precedent. He couldn't think of a time where somebody had been charged with lying to the FBI. He called it perjury, but it was lying to the FBI, has ever been provided this treatment, is, I think, the way he was insinuating.
Well, and President Trump hasn't pardoned General Flynn.
No, I know.
That's another difference.
I know.
President Obama is playing by his own rules.
Right.
As you led into this, and you said that, President Mitch McConnell said that presidents, when they leave the Oval Office, they normally just let the next guy have his turn. President Obama has no intention of that. He's going to weigh in on this, and he's going to sound hurt and insulted, and he's going to have the echo chamber in the liberal media, and they've done the nation such an enormous damage.
All right,
and
so
KT,
I don't think we're going to get a
yeah.
Yelp review on Becoming from you, KT. All right.
But KT, real quick, will you ever trust the FBI again?
Not without a lawyer standing right next to me.
There you go, girl.
And I used to be the biggest proponent and cheerleader of the FBI. That was my biggest problem, is I always thought of them as our friends. I thought they were the good guys, and in this case, they were the bad guys.
KT McFarland, former First Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, author of, pick it up, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy. This isn't the first crisis we faced together. Back in 2008, business professionals in trouble sought help from bankruptcy attorneys, loan modification attorneys, foreclosure defense attorneys, and IRS attorneys trying to gain full financial recovery. They should have just called me. Let me tell you about Chuck. His small business crashed in the 2008 crisis. He faced 2 foreclosures, overbearing creditors, and the dreaded IRS. Chuck would not even get out of bed in the morning. His wife heard me on the radio and convinced him to hire me. We got Chuck a loan modification and a short sale. We obtained a discharge of his debt and settled what was left of his IRS liability. Now Chuck is back in business and in control of his life. You can hear Chuck tell his own story at fullfinancialrecovery.com. We can get through this new crisis too. The time to start rebuilding is now. Don't let your life's work go down the drain. Get your free guide to recovery at fullfinancialrecovery.com. That's fullfinancialrecovery.com. Or call me right now at 312-664-6649. There's